Okay, so my question is, according to the research and the data that you have accumulated over this time, who's going to win the 13th general elections?
Right now, it's quite close to call. I mean, the reason is because we have 28% of the electorate being new. There's a bit of a potential for confusion in terms of how the EC displays its numbers. The electoral roll has about a 22% increase, but the number of new voters is 28%. So it's a very significant number of people that have registered to vote in this particular cycle. And typically, you are seeing less than 10%. So a lot of them are actually under the age of 30 years old, and thereby, less loyal to any political party. So there's a lot of grey areas. So based on our numbers, we are finding that at least 65 seats out of 222 are within 3%. Right. So it could go either way. So if, let's say, between now and election day, 1.5% of voters decide that I'm going to ditch party A and try party B, that's the end of the election there. So we are looking at some segments of the electorate being key kingmakers for this election. Young Malay voters under the age of 30 years old, out-of-town non-resident voters who live in the cities but vote in rural areas. In some constituencies, Indian voters, so that's why I think the Hindraf story is important. And in some places, voters that are working in Singapore, going back to Johor, Negeri Sembilan, Melaka, maybe KL, up to KL, who are going to come back and vote because these people never, perhaps didn't bother to vote before because they felt it wouldn't have made a difference.
And this time it could make a difference. What about you? Who's going to win?
We think that it's going to be a very tough fight, and prediction itself is very contradictory at this moment. It's going to be a tough fight, that's for sure, but a surprise is also not completely out of the picture. But whatever said, what is more important is to ensure that the election will be conducted in peace, and the situation like 1969 violence can be avoided. That will be the key hope of the Rakyat Malaysia that we think.
I think if you might want to add to that, I think, in all the 12 elections that we had before, nobody had any inkling or had any idea that the opposition would have a chance. It's about the chance of an ice cube in hell. But I think in this particular election, they do have a chance. And the reason is because you have such a huge number of new voters out there. And they have, we've been monitoring the electoral roll increases every quarter since 2009. And we do notice that the opposition parties have been registering a lot of young people. So they are registering the sons and daughters of their party members, their party faithful. And so these are motivated voters. If you look at the electoral roll and the election commission numbers, there are still about close to 4 million people that's unregistered. So it's not that these people were not approached, they didn't want to register. So those that are interested in the process, I think, have done so for the most part.
Yeen Seen, let's talk about Hindraf. You said that that's going to be a game changer.
Yeah.
Why?
Assuming that Najib's decision yesterday is going to be a game changer for this election, and assuming that 70% of the Indian votes return to Barisan Nasional, and assuming that BN can garner 30% of the overall Chinese votes, Barisan will take back 2/3 of the majority in parliament.
Is that a high possibility in CPPS's estimate?
That is Asli's analysis, that if the Chinese voters, if Barisan Nasional can secure 30% of the Chinese votes, and with the effort with Hindraf blueprint, 70% of the Indian voters vote for Barisan, BN can get 2/3 majority. But whatever said, all predictions remain prediction. The real poll happens on the 5th of May.
Okay, so as someone who does a poll, do you think that 70% of Indians is an achievable target?
It's a bit tough, right now, because the polling that we have been doing does show a return of some of the Indian votes back to the BN. But what we find is that the return is uneven. So it depends on what areas. If in urban areas, the return rate is much lower than compared to the rural areas. And I think in part, what happened in 2007, 2008 with the Hindraf movement, sparked a change change, just as it did with the Malay electorate back in 98. So there is an emotional break somewhat with the past, but you have new Indian voters and so on. So I think there is a possibility that you will get some Indian voters, additional Indian voters going back to the BN, but I sort of doubt whether it will reach 70%. I think reaching 65% may be possible in some parts of the country. But I think what really is critical, and maybe what the leaders in Barisan Nasional ought to focus, is the young Malay voters, because there's so many of them. The 2/3 of new voters are actually young Malays. And this is a segment that somehow is not touched by many government programs except for the 250 ringgit BRIM and the 200 smartphone rebate. And they are not really touched by a lot of the so-called Bumi Putra entitlement programs. So this group, is sort of disgruntled, but at the same time lacks political awareness. So that's, I think, a grey area.
Lacks political awareness?
Yeah, are you sure?
Because those that wanted to register have already registered, right? But there's still the rest. That level of political awareness is much lower than the rest of the public. We notice that they respond to issues, but the way they respond is more emotional based, as opposed to fact based and so on. So it's possible for political parties to sway them. So what we're seeing, the interesting thing is, young Malays, still respond to traditional communal political messaging, ethnic and race issues. So signing on to the Hindraft may bring an adverse effect on your Malay vote bank, because in the Hindraft documents there are items which talk about Section 153 and so on and so forth, position of Islam and all that, which becomes kind of complicated. So it depends on how this issue pans out over the next few days.
But perhaps young Malay voters, we also have to segregate them by whether they are rural Malays, or urban, and then whether it's the educated group, or it is just at the middle level. So I think all those are contributing factors. I see the pattern of voting that's going to take place,
and where they're getting their information sources from as well.
Exactly.
I think that would be very important.
Mostly internet.
Mostly internet. So this demographic will be getting their information from the internet,
social media.
So why do you say that they're not politically aware?
They're aware, but the information that they're getting, it doesn't give them a comprehensive or the breadth of the issue. So it will be dependent. If they are BN supporters, they will get a very skewed point of view. Likewise, if they are opposition supporters, it's very skewed. The stuff that's on the internet, rarely is balanced. So it needs personal initiative to find the balance there. So I think you're going to get hardcore supporters, but very little middle ground.
Okay. Well, we'll find out on polling day, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, both of you. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.